Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. If you are wanting to simplify everything and anything related to your yoga business, make sure to check out OfferingTree. I use and love their software, and I tell yoga teachers about it all the time. That's why they're our sponsor. Your students can easily go online, register, pay, fill out their waiver form, get the Zoom link or an email confirmation, and it's all automatic. It all happens without you needing to email back and forth or try and figure out payments and how to do that. This is why I love this company. They make things easy for yoga teachers. And they have a special discount just for you, dear listener. Go to offeringtree.com/Shannon and you can check it out, try it out for 14 days, and get a special podcast listener discount. That's at offeringtree.com/Shannon. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. And this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga land, which was colonized as the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. I also want to acknowledge that yoga was brought here to the West through colonization. The people who cared for yoga for a long time were not cared for or honored in that process. I didn't know that when I began my own yoga journey, and I'm really grateful for what yoga has taught me and for the teachers I've studied with. And I feel it's my responsibility to continue to question and learn how I can care for yoga. And as part of that, I'm learning more about cultural appropriation and colonization. So thank you for being here, for being part of this learning journey through all of the topics that we're covering, especially here in June. If you're listening in real time, we are going to dig into some topics around how we can really care for yoga. If you are brand new here, I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this podcast was created for you so that each and every week you are connected to information and inspiration. So while you're busy driving around, doing the errands that you need to do, running your business, maybe cleaning the house or walking the dog, all of the things that you have to do, you can listen to this podcast in those times, and this will help you to support the unique yoga business that you're growing. I'm especially excited about today's episode because I think it's a look into how we don't want our yoga classes to go, how we don't want yoga students to feel. And I'm a little bit hesitant as well. I have to tell you that. It's been interesting to put this together. I want you to remember that as we go through this today and as we hear from different yoga practitioners and teachers who've been kicked out of a yoga class, this is really a compilation of all of those. And this came about because I shared in a recent email how my friends were kicked out of a yoga class. And I'll tell you the full story on that in a moment. The response that I got from that email felt shocking to me. I felt like there were too many people who felt like they were either kicked out of a yoga class or not included, or who just felt really uncomfortable in a yoga class. So that led me to then post a question on our Facebook group asking for others to share any experiences of being kicked out of a yoga class. And that's where this episode was born. Many of you sent emails, voice messages, and notes telling me that you had also been kicked out of a yoga class or you just didn't feel welcome, safe, or included. And so I know that we can all learn from this. We can all become better yoga teachers, better people when we hear someone's experience of feeling this way. The inspiration for this email that I sent out was our episode with Gabby Parkham, where we talked about teaching LGBTQIA plus inclusive yoga. That was back in episode 265. We can link to that in today's show notes. And in my email that day, I said, this week on the podcast, I share a story with permission of how my friends got kicked out of a yoga class. They weren't doing anything to get kicked out, by the way. They got kicked out based on gender. This story has stuck in my brain over the years for many reasons. Here are the Coles notes. My friends are a couple that support each other. In this instance, she wanted to go to a yoga class that was focused on divine feminine, and he wanted to learn and support her. My friends were both under the impression that we all contain both masculine and feminine energies. She's a yoga teacher, he's a yoga student. When they arrived, he was the only male in the entire class, but he went to support and learn. Also, he had attended many classes as the only male in the room. The description of the class didn't say anything about who was invited to attend based on gender. After my friends got settled on their mats, the teacher approached them saying, "You can't attend this class, sir. It isn't for men." My friends both left the class upset. They both felt excluded. When they tell the story now, they highlight that they don't think it would happen nowadays. That should be where we are today. But I do wonder, how often do people not feel safe or included in a yoga class due to gender? I'm still learning how to be more inclusive. This is why I'm so grateful for Gabby and all that she shared in this interview. So that was the email that went out. And then here is what I posted on Facebook after getting a lot of replies from this email. On Facebook, I said, "This week in my email, I shared how friends of mine were kicked out of a yoga class. I was shocked to get replies from others who told me they too felt excluded or unwelcome in a yoga class. And then I asked if you have stories of being excluded or not welcome in yoga. I plan to compile these for a podcast episode and share them with permission so we can all learn." So today is all about me sharing those replies that I got. Again, this is so that we can learn and work towards more inclusive classes that feel safer for people, that feel welcoming and inviting. This isn't meant to shame anyone. It's all about learning so we can do better. I need to clarify that as a human walking this planet, as a podcaster who puts messages out each and every week over the last 5+ years, as someone who has run my own business and had websites and written articles, we mess up sometimes. As someone who has hosted hundreds upon thousands of hours of teaching yoga, we mess up. We learn and we do better. So I'm not pointing the finger and saying this is what so-and-so did. I'm shining a spotlight today on what people have sent in as their experience in a yoga class. And to kick things off, we're going to talk about permission to leave or get a drink of water or modify something during a yoga class. There were a lot of comments about teachers, specifically from hot yoga classes, not allowing this. I'm not saying this is only in hot yoga, but it was interesting to see this thread. So one person talked about how they were yelled at when they were leaving a Bikram yoga class. The teacher told them that leaving in the middle wasn't an option. Nikki Knob Levy, who was actually a guest on the podcast back in episode 181, where she was talking about growing her online business, she replied, and I'm sharing all of these with permission, all of the comments. I requested permission, just so you know. And also I want to highlight that there were so many comments and emails that came in. I can't share them all. If you do want to read the whole Facebook thread, I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. And you can also add to it if you feel like you have a story of not feeling included or being kicked out of a yoga class. So all of today's notes are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/275. And we'll also link to websites and contact information for the teachers who sent in comments, emails, and voice messages for those who said that they want to share that. So again, Nikki replied saying, "I have a similar story. The teacher yelled at me for drinking water at a non-sanctioned time." And then there's a little emoji that's like looking up. "She tried to trap me in there and I just kept moving and walked out of the door. Very culty." I agree, Nikki. Why are we not letting people get a drink of water? Okay, so then Stephanie Smith shared, "I had a similar experience in a Hot 26 class. I had left my water bottle in the car, thought I could get through class without it because that's what they teach is the best anyway. At one point, I realized I needed water, and I left the room for the water fountain. To glares from a lot of students. Some people get very upset when you let the heat out of the room. When I walked back in, the teacher rudely asked in front of the whole class, "Are you okay? Why did you leave?" I said I was fine and I just needed some water. Then she made a big show of leaving the room herself to get me a water bottle. It wasn't the question itself or even bringing me water, which seemed like caring actions. It was the way she said it, like she was intentionally trying to shame me in front of everyone. As a teacher now, I would never draw attention to someone leaving the room. There are more discreet ways to ask someone if they're okay or bring them something. I completely agree, Stephanie. I feel like that seems like a terrible situation, and I'm sorry that happened. The next comment was sent to us from Regina Arabia from Brazil. Regina, I hope I'm getting your name correctly. Thank you so much for taking the time to send me a quick audio clip so that I could get it right. Regina writes, "This well-liked teacher who packed the room at a gym every Saturday morning once scolded me for placing a block under my forearms during lizard pose. She said loudly for everyone in the room to hear that the blocks needed to be removed. Not interested why that was a better option for me that particular day. I wasn't kicked out or excluded, but I never went back to that class. Now as a teacher, I always invite my students to modify as much as they need to honor where they are in the practice. I say she was well-liked, so I'm sure many liked her style, which certainly was not for me." Thank you so much for this, Regina, for bringing awareness to really allowing students to find blocks when they need them. And also, I love this thread that came through all of this. Your comment highlights it really well. You had that experience, and then it changed you as a teacher. You want to make sure that students feel welcome to find the support that they need, whatever that is. And I think that's one thing that we can take away from today's episode. If something really rubs you the wrong way and you're like, why would someone treat someone like that? Or, oh gosh, I feel like I might have done a version of that. We can take that in and improve how we are as yoga teachers as we learn. We had a similar comment from Rebecca C., who said, "What about getting kicked out of a studio as a teacher for modifying during your own practice in a hot Ashtanga class you were forced to take to stay in quote-unquote good standing with the studio, despite contraindications that you shouldn't practice hot styles?" Oh my goodness, Rebecca, I am sorry this happened. I realize that yoga studios want teachers to participate and see what other classes are like, but we need to be following when we have contraindications, and we also need to be allowing for modifications. What is happening? Why are we not allowing students or yoga teachers, yoga practitioners, to modify? What's going on with that? Jennifer Downing said, "Yes, I've been kicked out of a class for drinking water. It was a hot yoga studio from a specific lineage. You can probably guess which one." So this seemed to be a common thread in a lot of these comments, that particularly hot yoga, there was this real, these are the rules. You can't leave, you can't drink water, you can't modify. And so I would question, again, what is going on with this? Why do we feel the need to control other bodies instead of letting them choose what they want to be doing? And not only choose what they want to be doing, choosing what they need to be doing. When someone thinks, I need to leave the room for a moment, or I need a drink of water, it seems harmful if we're not letting people do that. Next, I have an audio message that I am really excited that Aarti sent in to me along the lines of not feeling welcome or feeling excluded from yoga. Have a listen to what Aarti said.
Hi, Shannon. My name is Aarti, and I'm there. And I am very grateful to you for asking the question and for giving us the opportunity to share our experiences of being excluded or just feeling not welcome in yoga studios here in the West. Of course, my share is not referring to every single yoga studio, but it is describing my experience in many studios that I've visited over the past maybe 14 or so years as a teacher, but maybe 20 years as a student visiting different places, trying to find a home space. I also wanted to say that there are some studios that really do create a very welcoming and loving environment where I've felt totally accepted and very loved and very supported, and felt like there was a true understanding, a full honoring of the culture and a deep knowledge. And in those spaces, in those yoga centers, almost always it's because the folks who run that center have a very deep and honored practice themselves. And it really does show through. So I wanted to just make that really clear as well and share that. So I guess what really stands out to me the most is just being a person of Indian origin. I was born in India, raised in Ontario, Canada, and now I live in Central Florida in the States. I was raised with a lot of the traditions that we share in yoga classes. And for me as an Indian person, going to a yoga studio is a very odd experience. At first, when you walk in, you see symbols of your culture everywhere. You get a little waft of incense maybe, and that brings a familiar home sensation and feeling. But then as you look around, you see fragments of your culture, sometimes placed in ways that are either wrong or just a little off or completely inappropriate and really kind of harmful. Some examples of that are seen in almost all yoga studios that I've visited. For example, you walk in and you'll see like a Ganesh Murti or statue down on the floor, possibly near shoes or something. And that's not something that we do. It's considered to be, well, it's really the opposite of what we would do in our culture and our traditions. We don't place our murtis on the floor for a variety of reasons. Many reasons that, anyone who really carefully studies these traditions would understand why that's inappropriate and offensive and harmful. And then you see things like Om symbols, but they're placed on merchandise, or you see like mala bead necklaces for sale, and you see murtis in the bathroom, or you see like some Sanskrit words that are translated incorrectly, and they're all just bits and fragments and pieces of our culture and our religious traditions and our spiritual traditions mishmashed together with other cultural traditions. You'll see the yin and yang, and then you'll see the word Zen, and then you'll see a dream catcher, and it's just all kind of mashed together near t-shirts that say namaste in bed. When I see all of that, I feel that my culture is being really devalued here. And all of those cultures are sacred and beautiful in their own way, and they deserve to be honored and respected. And when we just pull out a tiny piece and place it on merchandise for sale or change the meaning, that's cultural appropriation, that's harmful. And what ends up happening is that people like myself don't feel comfortable coming into those spaces. We feel like those spaces aren't for us. And I know that's not the intention of the folks who are creating the studios, but if they look around, they probably won't see very many people who look like me there, or who practice yoga or our wisdom traditions at home in these studios. And it's because we know that those spaces aren't meant for us. And at worst, in some cases, when we bring it up, we get dismissed and sort of turned away. And that's also happened. So I have experienced some, if not all of those things, walking into spaces, and some very harmful things as well, like being removed from studios for teaching according to lineage or tradition. And yeah, so that's just a small taste, I think, of the general sense of exclusion that I might feel, and some folks who look like me or who come from a background similar to mine might feel in some yoga studios in the West.
Thank you so much, Aarti, for sharing the story of how this feels. And I hope our connected yoga teachers take a moment, take a pause, and sit with it. I know I've listened to your message a couple of times, so maybe even our connected yoga teachers want to rewind that and play that, and then take a look around. And let's keep this conversation going for sure of how can we care for yoga in a way that isn't doing this? Let's continue to learn that. We have some podcast episodes coming up for the rest of this month that are really going to dig into some of these topics. And in this, let's invite in the questions, the discomfort that comes along with it, especially if we are living in a white body in the West and yoga has been brought here to us. Let's invite that in. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast for the rest of this month. I'm going to be sharing with some vulnerability some of the episodes that made me really ask questions and feel uncomfortable. And also we'll be learning together. And I just want to say again, thank you so much, Aarti, for sharing this. It was a real gift of your time to walk us through in such a way that we could understand a little bit more about what this feels like if we haven't had that lived experience. Okay, another yoga teacher, Patty McCauley, thank you for commenting, shared a quick comment that said, at 34, I was told yoga was not for me by a quote-unquote teacher. I'm now less than 40 hours away from my 500-hour yoga teacher training. I am guessing, Patty, because this is a while ago that you left this comment, that you're either finished your 500-hour yoga teacher training or so close to finishing. And I just want to say congratulations and thank you for not listening to that person. As we know, yoga can be for everyone at every age in every body. And so I'm glad you did not listen. Sadie Webster sent in a comment that said, one of my students was turned away from a studio. They told her she was quote unquote too fat. Thank you for sending this in, Sadie. I think this is a very important topic that we look at. We have some podcast episodes that I will make sure that we link to in the show notes where we talk about people living in larger bodies and making yoga inclusive and accessible for all bodies so you can learn and listen more. Also, just out in the news, there was a BuzzFeed article that came out from Tiffany. I'll make sure that we link to that article. And if you're looking for Tiffany on TikTok or maybe on Instagram as well, it's Tiffany Crow W. To find out a little bit more and to follow Tiffany, I think this is someone worth following for sure. And it was really shocking. Tiffany acted out what it was like to be questioned by the front desk person as well as the yoga teacher, and acted out what it felt like to be really called out for her body size. I appreciate her time of doing that because it's such a gift when someone shares this experience so that we can just be better humans, be better yoga teachers and be better humans. Eve Sedano said in this thread, never kicked out, but early on in my journey, I experienced some unwelcomeness. I was once scolded for looking around the room to observe how others in the class were performing a pose. I was told this isn't a spectator sport, which I agree, but I wasn't sure of the instructions. So being the visual learner that I am, I paused my practice, looked around the room to better understand the instructions. Ultimately, it didn't affect my practice or my desire to continue learning yoga, but I do remember the weird, shameful feeling that came immediately after that for having misunderstood the alignment cues. Eve, thank you so much for sending this in. As someone who has gone to yoga and definitely looked around the room when I've been confused about the cues, sometimes I've been to yoga classes that are being done in a different language, and I'm definitely looking for visual cues. So it's important that we remember that we cannot think that everyone is going to understand our verbal cues, and we cannot think that verbal cues alone are going to walk someone through a yoga practice, especially a beginner. I appreciate also that Eve then went on to share, thank you for posting this question. It's been a while since I've taught in a studio class, but reading through these comments, I can see how I, myself, as a teacher, may have unintentionally made others feel unwelcome in my class. I wish to continually do better, learn more, and refine my awareness and sensitivity to the needs of others. Thank you so much for saying this, Eve. This is, again, what I just want to highlight over and over again is that we can learn from this. We can definitely take a look at how we are showing up to teach yoga, to share yoga, and look with a bit of self-compassion and reflection as well. Thank you for highlighting that. Erica, thank you for your comment. Erica said, I saw this post and thought, how could this happen? Then I remembered after I was a few weeks postpartum, I went to my first live yoga class ever. I felt embarrassed that I wasn't able to do things that others could do. And I was also singled out because I wasn't doing it correctly. No modifications were given. I think that's why I teach like I do. This is one of those examples again, Erica. Thank you so much for sharing this, that you probably after that class learned, hey, it's really nice to give some modifications or alternative choices for many poses. Thank you for sharing that. Along these lines, connected yoga teachers, I want to tell you about a really great article that Sinead from our team wrote over on the OfferingTree website. So OfferingTree is a small company that really cares about yoga teachers and their students. So they are providing amazing resources along with their software that I talk about a lot. Any wellness professional can access these resources, even if you don't use their amazing software. Like this article that Sinead wrote. So it's called 6 Easy to Implement Tips for Fantastic Client Retention. So boiled down, this is how do you get a student into your yoga class? So as Sinead wrote in this article, we know statistically that we spend between 5 and 25 times more energy when we attract new students, as opposed to nurturing your existing students, taking care of your existing students. So it's really important, and today's episode is highlighting this over and over again. It's really important that we look at how can we really take care of students when they get into our class. So the 6 tips that are in this article, I'll just summarize them here, but again, we'll link to this in the show notes, is how to wow your students, how to connect with them and make them feel nurtured, adding value, helping clients who want to set and meet goals, keeping things interesting, inviting feedback and giving incentives, and also how to build a strong and supportive community. It's a great article. I will share a link in the show notes, or you can look for the OfferingTree blog. So to do that, you just go to offeringtree.com, scroll down to the bottom, and you can see at the very, very bottom, how there's that footer at the end of some websites. There you can look for the blog. There's so many helpful articles on there. And also OfferingTree does free workshops each and every month. This is why we choose companies like this to sponsor the podcast. I'm already telling yoga teachers about their amazing software, and they're really doing the work of supporting yoga teachers. And we have a coupon code for you. So if you go over to offeringtree.com/Shannon, you can access that. That's offeringtree.com/Shannon. All right, let's get back into hearing from listeners who either got kicked out of a yoga class or who did not feel welcome or comfortable in one. Next, we're going to hear from Cindy Beers, who has 2 stories of not feeling comfortable in a yoga class. And I love how Cindy just spoke up and stood up for herself in these stories. Also, there's a quick F-bomb that does get dropped. So if you have little ears listening in the car, you might want to pause this. Okay, here's the audio that Cindy sent in.
Hi, Shannon. So happy you're allowing me to do this. And I'm just so grateful for everything that you're doing. My name is Cindy Beers. I'm a yoga instructor. I've been a yoga instructor for quite a long time. Before that, I was in the military for 18 years, and I was also a college professor. I am a yoga teacher that specializes in mental health. I specialize in working with people with anxiety, depression, PTSD, trauma, and stress. I've created the Yoga for Mental Health program, which will be at the Omega Institute coming up in June 5th through the 10th. Would love to see everybody there. The very first time was on my yoga journey back in, I would have to say 2005. And I was just starting yoga because I was very, very ill at the time. And I had fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and I was literally using a cane and a walker to walk. Okay. So I went to a beginner class because, I was a beginner. I could still do it, get down on the floor and everything like that. And the teacher, this is no lie, the teacher started shaming me because I could not get into poses very well or very fast. She's like, you need to speed it up. You need to go a little faster so you can keep up with the rest of the class. That was daunting to me. So right in the middle of the class, I got up and left. Last story, a Bikram yoga studio moved into my area. So me and about 5 other yoga teachers decided, let's go support a local business. Let's go. So we went into the yoga studio, signed up and everything, and walked in. And I have PTSD. So the first thing I noticed is I always like to make sure that I can have a clear view of the door. Okay. And they locked the door when you walked in. Okay. Made me a little nervous, but I'm like, okay, I'm with my girlfriends. Got to do it. I'm going to be okay. Then she gets up on the dais and starts teaching. Okay, fine. So we go through the class, and it's about an hour into the class because it's a 90-minute class. Hour into the class, I'm exhausted because, I wasn't used to hot yoga. And my girlfriends were exhausted too, but they just plowed through it. But you know what? I figured I'm not going to plow through it. I want to honor my body. I'm just going to sit my happy ass down and drink my water. The teacher comes over to me and says, who do you think you are? I'm like, excuse me? She goes, who gave you the permission to sit on my floor and stop doing the class? I said, well, I was getting tired and overheated. And so I just wanted to sit down and just chill out for a little bit and drink my water. Well, you can't do that. So I looked at this young lady and I said, oh, and then from there, she starts telling, oh, look, she can't handle the class. Isn't that sad? And she's looking around at the class and saying this thing, trying to make me feel bad. And I stood up and yes, I got in her face. And I said, you have 2 choices here. Either A, you can get your ass back up on the dais and let me sit here and drink my water quietly as I was doing, or B, you can unlock that fucking door and let me out. Which one do you want? And I said it loud enough to make sure everybody heard me. And she does this, walks back on the dais and does her class. And the teachers that I was with are like, oh my God, I can't believe you talked to her like that. This is Bikram yoga. You don't do that. I'm like, no, you don't talk to people like that. That is rude, number one. And number 2, there is no place in yoga philosophy where bullying comes in.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for taking the time to not only send me the audio of this, but also the video. It was just so fun to see your face. Connected Yoga teachers, I'm sorry, we do not have the video edited for you to share with that, but it was a really nice touch. But we have the audio so that you can listen while you're on the go. Thank you, Cindy, for standing up for people in a yoga class who have been, in your words, bullied. And that's exactly what it sounds like it was. And that's how it felt to you. Let's please, as yoga teachers caring for yoga, let's please stand up to that so that possibly other students are not experiencing that. Ryan McNeil commented saying, never been kicked out, but I have one story. During my 200 hour, we went on a field trip to practice at a different studio. It was non-heated, been there for years in a strip mall next to a shop that sells crystals, wall hangings, books, etc. I found a spot near the back, angled from the teacher that was comfortable, and was then told that was a quote-unquote regular spot, and I would have to move. So I complied and found a spot on the opposite side. I sat in silence for a couple of minutes before I felt someone approaching, opened my eyes, and they quietly said that was their spot and I would have to move. I looked around incredulously, and the teacher had a look on her face like, why are you still sitting there? I picked up my mat and took a spot near the far corner of the room, behind a pillar, and hated every minute of that practice. Needless to say, I haven't been back to that studio and tell that story every time someone mentions it. In hindsight, it was a great lesson on non-attachment. Oh my gosh, Ryan, I know what it feels like to walk into a yoga space and to think that's my regular spot, because we definitely as humans find comfort And this really reminds me of something that I used to do in yoga teacher training. Is I decided the very first weekend of yoga teacher training, everyone went back to their same spot when we came back from break and rolled out their mat there. So I decided I would mix things up. Maybe this just shows my level of how I sometimes like to stir things up. But anyway, I went to a new spot, and of course that person would have to go to a new spot, and then it would start to throw everyone off in the room. It was like a little experiment that I was conducting on my own, but it makes me think how attached we get to our spots. And I actually have never been to a studio where people are like, that's my spot. That is really interesting. And you're not the only one, because Eleonora wrote, "This also happened to me. Regulars had their spots and I was asked to move elsewhere." So I'm wondering, did you both go to the same studio, or is this happening at other studios? Along this similar thread, Danielle shared, "I attended a few classes of one specific teacher, and in every class I felt left out. She seemed to have a clique of friends in each class and would reference inside jokes, and it made me feel unwelcome. I wasn't kicked out of class, but I never went back." And another yoga teacher then responded with a similar story, saying, "I left a class because I felt unwelcome. The teacher formed a clique of students, friends, at the front of the class and would take selfies with them after every class, excluding other students from these photos. In one of these photos, she's twerking her butt with another student. I found out she hangs out with these students outside of class. I thought the behavior stunk of favoritism, but I kept going to get my workout in. One day, I was waiting my turn to ask a question about my injury while she was chit-chatting with a male student. She completely ignored me, and when I called her name, she lost her temper and barked that she doesn't have time for questions. That incident and the preferential behavior I witnessed in class left a bad taste in my mouth, and I decided not to come back. I know that if I were one of those students in her clique, she would have answered my question or been more courteous. The disgusting thing is that because this teacher is world famous and loved by the community, they can get away with any reprehensible behavior towards a student. All the other yoga teachers are friends with them, so they will side with them if a student makes a complaint." And this is sent by VV. So this is definitely happening in various yoga studios as well. And I'm so sorry that you've had this experience. I feel like I would feel the same way if all of a sudden there was this favoritism and this weirdness in yoga. Jill from Boise, Idaho has been practicing yoga since 1981. And Jill wrote, "How about being kicked in yoga class? Yes, the teacher did that. Thinking it would fix my stance or whatever, I've never taken another class from her again. But kicking someone out of class, in all my decades of yoga experience, I've never seen it or been on the receiving end. I've left studios where I felt it wasn't a good fit." Jill, I am so sorry that you had this experience of being kicked in a yoga class. I never expected to get that response from this. So let's please call out teachers who are kicking students. Honestly, connected to yoga teachers, this is where when I started reading the comments, I was like, what is happening? How are we getting to this place of yoga? So if you need to take a break for a moment, kind of shake things off, the next couple of audio clips that I want to share with you are ones that I just want to give a trigger warning. We dive in a little bit deeper here. I think it's super important. So if you have the capacity to learn, please do that. And if you need to honor yourself, we are going to be talking about intimate partner violence. Now, I'm so appreciative of Nikki DeSalvo, who shared a comment in this thread and then expanded even more in a voice message. So the comment that Nikki shared first said, "I've never been, quote unquote, kicked out of a yoga class. I think this is because I seem white, seem neurotypical, and I'm not obviously queer or disabled or fat. But I feel uncomfortable most of the time and even overtly unwelcome. While culture is beginning to change, we have such a long way to go before we are collectively dismantling our own violence in racism, ableism, gender and sexual-based bigotry, fat phobia, and more, especially in our trainings and work beyond the classroom." So thank you for posting this, Nikki, and also thank you for your voice message. So let's hear what Nikki has to say to expand on this a little bit more.
My name is Nikki DeSalvo, and I'm the founder and director of Survivor-Led Movement, I'm a Himalayan Institute-trained Ayurvedic yoga specialist and also a survivor of intimate partner violence, or IPV. I teach mutual aid movement makers who are survivors like me and maybe you how to establish daily Ayurvedic yoga practices so that we are better resourced to lead our movements. I responded to Shannon's question because as a survivor who's both a teacher and student of yoga, I'm privy to the stories of my students and also have a depth of lived experience in yoga classrooms and teacher trainings. My lived experience, unfortunately, does include a multitude of these microaggressions, as well as more egregious harm, which I wrote about. Now, in my mind, this should come as no surprise, as most of us have heard at least a story or three about well-known yoga teachers abusing students, right? But what about our own neighborhood teachers? What about accountability and skilling are we expecting of them? There's clearly a disconnect here, and this mirrors what we see about IPV too. There's this lack of clarity about who gets abused, who abuses, what defines abuse, and who's responsible for creating change. Since gender-based IPV is reported by approximately 1 in 3 women around the globe, it's safe to say that survivors populate yoga classes in significant numbers that are intersectional, right? Updated education is sorely needed. Teachers are barely beginning to address their lack of awareness about racism, ableism, LGBTQIA-related bigotry. So gender violence, while sickeningly common, it isn't really even on their radar. Teachers at this time aren't really equipped to negotiate or renegotiate their own experience with systemic IPV because they can't even see it. And if they can't identify IPV in our communities, they're really unlikely to be able to identify internalized misogyny as well. So because of this, we are seeing distortions in understanding and teaching philosophy, in language choice, in attitudes about student-teacher relationships, and we see all of this in their marketing as well. It's harmful to survivors. Let me say that again. It's harmful to survivors, and it fails to disrupt violence in very real and practical ways, beginning with an unwillingness to become responsible for that awareness and failing to respond to any call to action. So another aim of my work is to provide survivors with yoga teacher training so that survivor-led yoga becomes more accessible to the 1 in 3 women around the world experiencing this gender violence, facilitating survivor representation and creating more welcoming yoga classrooms where survivors' needs are truly understood, affirms that the dismantling of oppression truly is at the heart of this practice. So there's so much more to say about this. I barely scratched the surface. I just want to end with 2 quotes, the first by Jeanette LeBlanc and the second by Kara Page. LeBlanc says, "You will quite literally encounter the notion that we create our own reality. This can be an empowering idea. It's also true in so many ways, but it's also entitled and arrogant and can quickly evolve into a dangerous form of gaslighting. When this happens, it's an act of shaming and it's a violence done because fucked up things happen, fucked up and violent things. And to say that we create the entirety of our own realities is a way this world will have people, especially marginalized group of people, hold responsibility for the circumstances in which they were without power. Guard yourself against perpetuating this, and hold yourself tenderly and solidly if it's ever pushed upon you." And from Kara Page, "Our movements themselves have to be healing, or there's no point to them." You can learn more about the needs of yoga practicing survivors and support the survivor-led creation of mutual aid projects at survivorledmovement.com.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for all of your time. After you left this message and after the next one that I'm actually going to play from Michael, I started thinking, okay, maybe this is something that we need to talk about more. I've reached out to both Nikki and Michael and suggested it, and it's something that is culminating. It's an idea of, a little bit more of how we can take care of our yoga students who have dealt with, are dealing with intimate partner violence. And so if you have questions, connected yoga teachers, or if you have ideas, This is where we're doing the learning together. So reach out if you do. Speaking of learning, Michael Simon is always someone I'm learning from in our Connected Yoga Teacher group in his very thoughtful comments. And so Michael had posted saying, I've not been kicked out, but very nearly left my first ever class. I walked into a room of all middle-aged women. I was the only male in the class. The stares and the looks up and down were so intimidating. I felt the best thing to do was to leave. The teacher came in as I was leaving and introduced herself, offered to find me a space, and reassured me I was welcome. So I saw this comment, reached out to Michael, asked if I could share it, and then he expanded a little bit more in a voice message. And I'm so glad that he did and that he gave me permission to also share here on the podcast. Thank you so much for that, Michael. Let's hear his voice message here.
Hi Shannon, it's Michael Simon. I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into me because you've asked about sharing some of my experiences for feeling welcome in a yoga class. So I live in Australia, in Victoria. The area in which I live in Victoria is known as Yarraville, and it sits on Wurundjeri land, which is part of the Kulin Nation of the Australian Indigenous population. The Australian Indigenous population is touted to be the oldest in the world and has a rich history of both meditation and movement. I'm a white, middle-aged male and who is cisgender. I'm in a fairly active and healthy body, and I have access to quite a lot of privilege within the community that I live as a white Anglo-Saxon male within the Australian community. And none of that privilege is lost on me in the way that Australia in particular has treated both people who are not originally from this country, who might be immigrants or refugees or Indigenous people. And so I am well aware of the privilege which I hold. And I actually just got through listening to one of your podcasts where you spoke with Nikki about survivors of trauma and in particular sexual assault. And whilst I've not been a victim of sexual assault, I was a victim of quite a violent first marriage just over 20 years ago. And whilst it's really, really rare for a woman to be the aggressor in a relationship, that was my experience. And so I wanted to kind of bring this forward to you so that you could have some context around what I was feeling when I didn't feel welcome in my first yoga class. And that was around the way that I was looked at and the non-verbal cues that came from, in particular, white, mostly older than middle-aged women. And it was really intimidating for me. I found it quite unsettling. And for someone who was really very unsure about whether yoga was something that I wanted to play a part in my life, it really shook the foundations of where I sit as far as my confidence around, in particular, women comes from. And still today, as a practicing teacher, I do quite often feel very self-conscious. And obviously that's something that I need to work through, and it's something that I continue to work through. But I just wanted to be able to give you this context so that you had some insight, and I'm more than happy for you to share this with the podcast if you wish to. But it's more about the fact that we don't know the background of any one person who comes into a yoga class, particularly in the environments that I teach in where the majority of the classes are drop-in. And so we have no idea the lived experiences of the people who are coming into our domain and expecting to have a yoga lesson. And what does that even look like for them. In a lot of cases, you know, people will just follow along and they'll try and do their best. And, you know, I was really buoyed by some of the things that Nikki said, in particular about the slamming door. And that's something that happens a lot in gym environments, which is where I mostly teach. You know, people dropping weights and that kind of stuff and making quite loud noises, particularly around Shavasana, or if we might be conducting a yin class. Those things can be really unsettling for people. Thanks for listening, Shannon.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Michael. I am so grateful. It helps me to really have empathy and to come back to that understanding and that compassion of we have no idea what people are dealing with as they walk into a yoga class with us. So I'm just grateful for everyone really who's commented and shared something that happened to them or a friend. It's a real learning experience when we can read the stories of how someone felt and what their experience was. Elaine shared a comment saying, I'm 78. I've been teaching and practicing yoga for 50 plus years. I've been treated badly and ignored in workshops that I paid a pretty penny for. Age discrimination is real in the yoga community. I was in a workshop and was the only person the teacher did not work with personally. So I asked if the reason she ignored me was my age. Did she believe I did not deserve the same attention as my younger yogis? Was I invisible? Just had to share. Thank you so much for sharing this, Elaine. And I think it's really important to note you have been practicing yoga for 50 plus years. You have a lot of experience, and what is happening in society where we are not honoring that and not acknowledging that in the same way. Thank you for being brave also for asking this teacher. I don't know what her reaction was, but I'm hoping that it made her pause and consider future workshops. Natasha shared a comment and then expanded a little bit more in a private message and gave me permission to share. So Natasha says, I've felt racially excluded as well as excluded while doing certain positions in yoga studios. And then Natasha went on to say, I've never been kicked out of class. However, I tried to speak to an instructor about how I felt racially excluded, and I ended up crying and leaving because of how she responded, gaslighting me and not even giving me the courtesy or general respect to listen. Interrupted me, walked away a few times. I felt so uncomfortable and unheard. It was horrible, the whole situation, and I never went back. It was actually the reason why I started studying yoga. I don't want anyone, no matter who, what they are, to not feel safe, heard, or included. And when they just want to do and experience yoga, it's our responsibility as instructors, studio owners, etc., to create the container that can allow people to feel safe and or included, and hopefully connected to the practice or spirit of yoga. Thank you so much, Natasha, for putting this together and expanding on this comment and sharing your experience of this. And then thank you for then taking it and making better yoga spaces. We've got 2 more here, connected yoga teachers. And like I said, there's a lot more in that thread. So you can head over to the connectedyogateacher.com/275 if you want to offer support. That's the other thing I want to mention is lots of connected yoga teachers were popping in there and saying, oh my gosh, I'm sorry you've had this experience, or now can we be best friends because you just shared with this incredible way of sharing something. Or what I love is the connection that is happening and the support. So thank you if you are one of those teachers that was popping in there to do that. So Jane posted and said, I was recently bereaved, having lost my husband, went on a yoga retreat to try and heal a bit. I told the teacher, to which she replied, I'm not going to be your emotional crutch. Okay, Jane, this is shocking to me that someone would say that would be someone's reaction. Okay. Jane goes on to say, throughout the first class, she asked us to write things down in a journal after each posture. Then we were told to share with the class, which I wasn't in a place to do at the time. So I nicely told her this, and she told me to leave. This was also a teacher that made us run around the class, jump over our mats, and as soon as we passed someone, we had to slap them on the face. She was also a counselor. Jane, I am so sorry. there will be a lot of our connected yoga teachers who are horrified to hear this story. I want to do some podcasts on grief and yoga, and this would be like what not to do. Thank you for sharing, because I feel like we can all learn a lot in terms of this is not a safe container. Okay, and then finally, another connected yoga teacher said, kicked out? No, but uncomfortably singled out? Yes. My body has been through a few car accidents, one as a pedestrian, and my left hip and ankle are not factory standard. I've put a lot of time into moving well again, and I do move well, but my joints literally just don't move in the standard ways. So there was a yoga class where the teacher spent honestly half the class trying to cue, adjust, and correct me into moving the way she expected, making way too much contact, and to the detriment of the rest of the class, as I gently explained again and again that the details she wanted from me were not possible, that I was adapting the postures, that my body had received some damage and was still working through. This was a senior teacher in her program. I never went back and got special permission to take different classes for my first YTT. I don't think she knew she was being weird and ableist. I don't read as injured most times. But then again, my body has responded well to my efforts, and in that I'm lucky. Still, you just don't know what is going on for any person, and it's best not to single them out or force their body into shapes it does not like. Thank you for sharing this comment and everyone else who has shared comments. I hope we can learn. We don't know how someone is coming into class emotionally, physically, spiritually. Let's do our best, connected yoga teachers. And by the sounds of these comments, we need to do our best to call some things out in the yoga world, to find more education. And like I said, we are going to do our best to share some more here on some podcasts going forward this month. We also have lots of other podcasts if you want to dig into some of the social justice topics that we've touched on here today: racism, ableism, diversity, equity, inclusion, making people feel welcome. The podcasts are free resources. So if you are feeling like, well, I just don't have the funds to take more training, don't worry. Lots of podcasts are here for you. And then if you want to expand, please reach out to the experts in these areas and learn more. We will be back here next week learning from one of those experts, Susanna Barkataki. I'm so excited that you get to listen in as we talk about how we can care for yoga's South Asian roots. This is one of those podcast episodes that you do not want to miss if you are a yoga teacher sharing yoga in any way, and also if you're a yoga practitioner. Thank you to everyone who sent an email, who posted a comment, who sent a voice message. I could have been here for 3 or 4 episodes recording this, and at times it honestly felt a little overwhelming sifting through this. I want to remind you, this is a compilation of some of the worst experiences in yoga. Maybe what we also need to do is remember and put together at some point a compilation of the gifts that yoga has given as well. Please keep that in mind. I also want to thank you for being here all the way until the end of today's episode, because I'm sure that some of this was hard to take in as someone who cares for yoga and wants people to be having the best experience ever in every single class. Let's continue the discussion. I will link to this Facebook thread in our show notes. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/275. And if there is some way that we can support the work that you're doing, if you feel like you want to learn more about any of these topics that we've covered here today, or a different topic that you think would help to make yoga a more inclusive and more compassionate practice for everyone, let us know. I also want to say a huge thank you to Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead for bringing everything together for today's episode. And I want to thank you, and I want to ask you, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?